David Shapiro from Sasfin Securities joining us this evening to break down those movements. So not a great start to the week, David. Last week, the market had a wonderful rally based on the lower than expected inflation data out of the United States, but also other important economic data coming out from the global economies. This week, though, starting off on a negative footing, and it's all got to do with China and its outlook based on the data that it's put out. Your thoughts on today's movements?
Well, it was a disappointing number. It's lower than the market expected. And of course, that has an impact on us because China, a big consumer of commodities. And there were areas in their numbers, that suggested that demand would slacken. So we saw commodity shares come under a lot of pressure today, on that news. So most of our commodities down. I know the big story coming out of that is Richemont. Richemont came out with a half-year trading update, which looked okay. Sorry, it was the first quarter, which was pretty good if you look at it in absolute terms, but it missed where the market expected numbers to be. So, of course, they came down, but also add to that, worries about a Chinese slowdown, because if you look at the Richemont numbers, most of the strong demand is coming out of the Asia-Pacific area, which is obviously China is the big consumer. So markets marked down not only Richemont, but all luxury goods, which affected the European markets as well. Richemont down nearly 9% today, which is a big, big number. There was a lot of trade in Richemont today, making up about 12% of our market. But that can move the needle. It's the biggest company in the all-share index. So if you're asking why the all-share was down, largely attributable to Richemont. But so that's the story. But I think the Chinese story as well, one's got to look at the commodity prices. And then we had a trading update from Anglo-Platts, which also worrying because remember last year, this is where we made the tax receipts. This is where we got special tax receipts. Now it's going the other way. So a bit of a concern out of Anglo-Platts today as well. Yeah, I think those were the two main headlines.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up the company updates because I wanted us to discuss them. And just back to Richemont, and apart from the growth in sales that it saw in China for the period, the United States and parts of Europe not doing too great. I suppose, David, it is kind of the story of the consumer, the middle class, upper class consumers. They are starting to feel the pressure of the higher inflation, the higher cost of living in general. And I suppose that's reflected in the first quarter of that Richemont update.
I think particularly in the US. Yeah. I'm a bit surprised because I thought that they would do better than they did. I don't understand the US market in watches and in jewelry. I thought it would have held up because the other numbers that are coming out of other luxury companies are fairly robust. But I mean, if you compare that with Asia Pacific, still very, very strong numbers. And Rafi, there's something very interesting. If you go through this Chinese retail sales numbers, strangely enough, jewelry was up and clothing was up. It was down on motor vehicles, I think also down on property and other areas. But oddly enough, and I hope I'm reading them right because, I have a quick glance at them, but they still look pretty decent. So I hope it's not reflected in the next quarter numbers and that, we still get good demand for jewelry and other luxury goods coming out of that region.
Yeah, I mean, David, obviously, no matter how hard times are, you still want to look good. So that's probably the reason. We don't have much time left, but I do want to reflect on Absa's trading statement that they put out on Friday afternoon. The pressure on the consumer is very evident in their results that are coming out. And they reflect that in the trading statement, saying impairments are actually quite high.
That's, again, we've had such good numbers coming out of the banks. And this was the first warning saying, hold on a sec, things are not that good. We're starting to see, we're starting to have to make more provisions. Our impairments are going to increase. And that's a warning sign to all the other banks. And of course, that will translate also into retail sales as well, or into the consumer segment. So we've had two rather disturbing stories out today. Number one, the Anglo-Platts results, which has come from lower commodity prices. And the other, I think, the warning coming out of Absa, which is also concern about what lies ahead. And, this is all to do with load shedding and and also the global economy as well. So it's going to be a tough second half, I think, for South African economy, for South African corporates.
Yeah, and then just finally, David, you mentioned Anglo Platinum. I suppose it's cyclical that you'd find that the commodity prices have now taken an about turn. But your view on the likes of an Anglo Platinum, other commodity or other miners, and the medium-term outlook for them, should the situation in China, for example, turn around for the better?
I think it's going to turn. That's instinctive. So I've got no empirical proof. But I think having watched commodities, you're going to find the trough being made soon, trough being the bottom of the market. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're already seeing the bottom. We can't recognize it, and it takes time for you to recognize it. But I think from that point of view, I think we'll start to see things improving. And, that will be led by the US. You're getting a much better feel coming out of the US, despite all the warnings of recession and slowdowns and that. You can see the markets are holding up very well. And I think that's going to give us some clues as to where we're going to be. And as Eleanor said we will start to see rate reductions coming through. We're certainly going to see them in the US shortly. So I think probably we've seen the worst of the news. I think that's already bypassed us.
Us listening to you speak are really hoping that is true, David Shapiro. Thank you very much for that update. That is David Shapiro from Sasfin Securities, bringing us an update on how the JSE ended off the day, some of the local and the global factors contributing to that. We'll be back in the next bulletin with some of the day's other business stories.